Joining us, managing editor at The Bulwark and MS Now contributor Sam Stein, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Wesley Clark, Washington Post columnist, and senior fellow for national security studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, Max Boot, and senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, Stephen Cook. All right, so Max, I'm going to begin with you. Do you have a clear idea for what the justification was, for what the goals are?
Clear as mud, Katie. It's very hard to discern because I think, as you very accurately said, the justifications for this were all over the place. Remember that the march to war actually began after the protests in Iran in early January. Trump said help is on the way. Help was not on the way. The protesters were slaughtered. But eventually the U.S. forces arrived, and Trump shifted from helping the protesters to using Iran's nuclear arsenal as a justification. And now he's laid out a lot of goals about destroying the nuclear program, destroying the missile program, destroying the Iranian Navy. But he's also talked about regime change and asking the Iranian people to rise up, but without any guarantee that the U.S. would come to their aid if they rise up and get slaughtered, as happened in Iraq, for example, in 1991. I think the upside from Trump's perspective, Katie, of keeping it so amorphous and confusing is that almost anything that happens, he can claim as a victory. But it's very hard to know what in-state U.S. troops are actually trying to achieve beyond simply degrading the Iranian nuclear arsenal. And of course, we know historically that U.S. forces are much better at toppling regimes than building up civil society or building up governments, stable governments in their place. And I think there is a real risk of chaos following in the wake of U.S. Military action.
I wonder, General Clark, if you can see this as turning out like Venezuela. The two countries are so opposite. But could there come a point where the regime finds itself an off-ramp, has a win of their own, and then comes back to the negotiating table, and what is left is the same regime, just a different and perhaps more workable person for the U.S. in charge?
I think it's possible. I think it's kind of unlikely because the leadership there is pretty heavily indoctrinated. They're zealots. I think maybe we can find somebody who can break, but I'm not sure he could pull others in. But yeah, it's a possibility. You know, the thing is, Katie, when you're engaged in something like this, you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And this is the risk, of course, is that it's easy to get into a war. It's hard to figure out how to get out of it sometimes. I see three end states here. One is the Iranians, after they've lost the ability to cause chaos, and that may take a week or two of taking out their missile launchers and aircraft and other things and making sure they can't continue to mine or block the straits. Then they say, okay, well, let's get out of it what we can, and they come back and they want to talk. I think another way out of it is the president's going to say that we can't go on for 2 months, 3 months, and he's going to tell the intelligence agencies, and maybe Mossad will join in this. They'll send a bunch of weapons in, empower the Kurds, help the Iranian resistance, arm itself, and the security agencies there in Iran will sort of disintegrate under pressure. I think that's a possibility. I think it's a possibility that the Iranians will just hunker down like a tortoise and pull their head inside the shell and say, okay, we've done what we can. Just continue to bomb us. Eventually, you'll run out of bombs. We don't care. That's a possibility. But at that point, we're going to need some elder statesmen to go in and talk sense to these Iranians. We did this in Kosovo. When we started it, we weren't sure. The French said, well, surely, General, this will be over in 3 or 4 days. And I mean, you couldn't say it wouldn't be. But it actually went on for 11 weeks. And we ramped up the number of aircraft. We ended up 1,000 aircraft, 5 aircraft carriers out there. We completely isolated Serbia. We used the threat of ground troops. We started to begin planning for them. It was known to Milosevic. And ultimately, we sent in the Finnish President Ahtisaari and the Russian Vice President Viktor Chernomyrdin. And Milosevic controlled himself and realized he was going to lose. And the longer he stayed in it, the bigger he was going to lose. And it took 11 weeks of that. And there was a lot of impatience and a lot of questioning along the way, and people saying, oh, you can't do this with air power, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at something like this, you got to have a lot of confidence in the U.S. military. They are good. We don't know everything that we thought we knew about the Iranians. They may have some surprises also. And war is difficult. You can't always predict it.
Yeah,
but
and
it's just what it is. I hope, Katie, look at it this way. For 47 years, the Iranians have spoiled for a fight with the United States, the great Satan, and constantly chanting, death to America, death to America. Well, okay, they're finally getting what the regime wanted. They wanted a fight. They finally, it's come to them on the issue of every American president has said no nuclear weapons for Iran because they could very well use it unprovoked against Israel or other states in the region. So it's just come to this. It's unfortunate.
Let me bring Stephen in. Let me bring Stephen in because I'm curious, Stephen. There is I think, a very justifiable and understandable desire to compare this to past scenarios, to compare it to Iraq, to compare it to Venezuela. The president wants to compare it to Venezuela. But Iran is so different. It's so fundamentally different than any other country in the region. The people are different. The military is different. It is deeply ingrained into the government. It's very powerful. They've got a monopoly on violence, as we have witnessed with the number of people that citizens they've been willing to kill for protesting. And also the regime itself, the clerical part of it and the technocratic part of it are all very much intertwined. Can you get to a point where you fundamentally change this regime without an all-out, on-the-ground war where Iranians themselves are armed?
Well, Katie, I think that the only way you really get the overthrow of the regime, and that is overthrowing the political system and the social order that has been in place over the last 47 years, is by the hand of the Iranian people. It doesn't seem to me that the United States is prepared to march an army on Iran. And what you point out is very true. Iran is a different kind of state than Iraq or Venezuela. The Islamic Republic is really a system. So if you take out Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to force change in the regime. So this is a very, very significant undertaking. And I'll just point out that the president has made two statements in which he's referred to regime change, but in his most recent statement, he stepped away from it. We're not sure whether that's an actual policy change or not. But I think when he talks about a Venezuela option, he is not really understanding the differences between Iranian society and the system in Iran and what was happening in Venezuela. He'll also have another problem with his partner, which are the Israelis, who do not want a Venezuela option. They do not want the United States to make a deal with regime figures that would allow them to salvage some aspects of the Islamic State, including hostility to Israel. And that's why the Israelis are going about eliminating all of these people. The president referred to it himself. He said he had a number of people in mind, but they died in the first phase of the war. That was, I think, on purpose. The Israelis want to prevent a Delcy Rodriguez solution. But I think
also the question is, are the Americans and the Israelis on the same page?
Well, I think broadly speaking, of course, they are on the same page. I mean, this is kind of unprecedented military cooperation between these two countries. Prior to Israel becoming part of CENTCOM, the United States cooperated with Israel intermittently and isolated and really on the intelligence level. But this is full-on military cooperation. But I think when push comes to shove, the Israelis are much more interested in creating a pathway for Iranians to get out into the streets and bring down the Islamic Republic, whereas the president might be tempted to try to find someone within the power structure there with whom he can have a deal.
Get out quicker. He likes to do things faster. All right. How is this America first, Sam? Marjorie Taylor Greene says it's America last. If you go to polling, I mean, I said this the other day, I'll say it again. There was 21% that supported an attack on Iran. Only 21% supported an attack on Iran of the American people. That was before. Now, that number is, I think, like 23%. I think we can pull it up on the screen. 23%, 27% approve, of Donald Trump's attack on Iran. So how is this America first?
Well, it's not. The poll numbers have been fairly consistent. I know there's been a couple of other surveys in the field. Look, I think broadly Republicans are supportive of what Trump's doing, but not in the kind of overwhelming numbers that you normally see a Trump initiative. We're talking something closer to like 80 to 85% as opposed to 90 to 95%. It's independents who are really opposed to it, and obviously Democrats firmly opposed to it. And I think that independent number is comprised of a bunch of people who are formally Republican or MAGA-ish, but aren't necessarily bought in entirely. And I think you're seeing a lot of key components of Trump's base come out and question this action. I mean, it's not just Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been fairly vociferous in her tweeting about this. It's Steve Bannon. Eric Prince, of all people, was out there saying stuff like this. Alex Jones, not that I put much stock into what Alex Jones says, but, you know, people do. And if you have that type of element of the MAGA base who's just like, this is not what we were promised during the campaign, and they're already skeptical of this engagement only a couple days into it, you have to imagine that if it does last several weeks, as Trump is now saying it might happen, and if there are boots on the ground, as Trump has not now said that could happen, and if there are more casualties, as Trump says we should expect should happen, that those numbers are going to actually get much worse for the president.